Welcome back, everybody. Now, in the midst of the celebrations about the 78.2% matric pass rate in 2018, the lobby group Equal Education says that their research shows that the pass rate is actually declining. Well, in a statement, the EE says that there is an overemphasis on the matric pass results and that we should rather look at what learners had to go through to reach matric. And joining us this morning in studio is Hopolang Selebalo from the Equal Education to talk about their research and what it says about the matric results, and Mugwena Maluleke, the General-Secretary of the South African Democratic Teachers Union, and education expert Professor Mary Metcalfe also join us now on the line to talk about the matric results. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And Professor Mary on the line, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to you. I'm going to start with you, Hopolang. According to your research, the matric pass rate is in actual fact declining between 41 and 37%. Can you elaborate on this?
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. So we would say that the matric pass rate masks some of the fault lines within the basic education sector. So in terms of the actual results in the 78% pass rate, we need to rather look at what we call the throughput rate, which is tracking the cohort that was in grade 2 10 years ago up until matric and those outcomes. So then if you take those calculations rather than who sat and then who passed, you will find that the matric pass rate this year in 2018 is at around 40%, which is quite a big difference from 78%. And we can get into the myriad of reasons behind that gap and why the matric pass rate in actual fact is quite low.
Yeah, and you're actually saying that, the matric pass rate fails to include the learners who dropped before grade 12. But then do you think that's quite a significant number to impact on the actual pass rate?
It's quite a significant number. So let's say we look at the grade 2 cohort, for example. So you have about 1 million learners, just over 1 million learners in grade 2. Fast forward to 10 years later, you find that there are about 500,000 that are writing the matric exam, and about 400,000 that actually passed the exam. So we've lost a significant number of learners in that period of time, particularly in the higher grades, so from grade 9 onwards. So some of the research from the DBE, for example, revealed that about 12% of learners walk out of school without grade 9. And the number, about half of those are in KZN and the Eastern Cape. Half of those learners are in KZN and the Eastern Cape. Okay. So it is quite a significant loss, and we need to start talking about how we retain learners within the education system.
All right. Mr. Maluleke, are you also of the view that the matric results are actually declining? What's the general feeling for teachers?
No, they are not declining. The general feeling from the teachers is that we have been improving from year to year. If you look at 2013, we have been improving, not only in terms of the statistical pass rate, but we have been increasing in terms of the number of learners that are writing. So you are dealing with the issue of dropouts that you have to take care of. And therefore, for me, statistically, it is that when you say the pass rate is superficial, you can't be counting the learners who did not say it. You should be dealing with the real problem of that particular dropout rather than to be saying that the pass rate is superficial, because the message that we are sending out there, it is that the quality of the passes that are there, and that is a layman's understanding, is going to be like, look, it means that these learners are going to universities, but they don't know anything. That's the word superficial. The researchers and statisticians can understand that particular language, because at the end of that, if 10 learners wrote and then 5 passed, it's 50%. Right. So if 12 learners wrote, it will be if 60% passed. But if you count those who did not write, without understanding that they branch out, some of them because of migration. Let's talk about intra-migration into provinces. KwaZulu-Natal learners come to Gauteng, and in that particular year, they miss a year of schooling.
Having said that, then what makes you think that the rate is actually increasing?
I mean, the rate of the learners who really are going into matric is increasing as compared to the previous years, where we used to have about 158,000, 300 and something 8,000. Now we have got at least 500,000 of learners who are really remaining in the school system so that they can write. Not that we're not concerned. We're really concerned about those that are dropping out. We need to find the real reason why they are dropping out, because we know some of them go to the TVET areas. We need to follow them up there. We know that intra-migration causes problems where the Eastern Cape learners migrate to the Western Cape, they migrate to Gauteng, and in that particular period, we start losing them because some of them, the parents not register them into the school for a year or 2 years, and therefore they fall out of that particular cohort of the learners who started schooling 12 years or 10 years ago. So we need to start understanding the real reason and so forth. So us as teachers is that having put so much efforts to ensure that we retain the students up until Matric, where we have got 500,000 of those have registered, we need to really be commending the teachers, commending the schools, and then deal with the social problems that are causing the dropout.
I want to engage you more on the actual retention of these students in just a moment. But that, for now, let me just bring in Professor Mary Metcalfe on the line. Professor, thank you so much for staying with us. We've heard the Equal Education saying that the actual Matric pass rate has been declining over the years. But then the South African Democratic Teachers Union saying that, no, it has actually been increasing. What's your views?
It's an interesting question because, in fact, both Mugwena Maluleke and Hopolang are correct. The Matric pass rate is something that we need to celebrate for those learners who, with the support of their families and teachers, achieved Matric and succeeded extraordinarily well, despite often very difficult circumstances. But there's a bigger social problem, and that social problem that EE has put its finger on is that as a country, we are losing so many young people who leave school entirely. They don't proceed to TVET colleges. They are the young people that we see on the streets of the township who have lost hope because they've left school before the certification point of grade 12. So when Hopolang says that they've left with grade 9, they haven't left with anything because there is no certification point. And I think the analysis of Matric has shown for a long time, and the DBE statistics themselves show that it's differential across the country. But the worst affected provinces are, in fact, the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. In the Eastern Cape and Limpopo, you have as few in Eastern Cape as 37% of adults who are aged between 20 to 28 years who'd completed Matric. Only 1/3 of young adults completing Matric. Now, this is a challenge that I think both Mugwena and Hopolang will agree on. The National Development Plan, 6 years ago, committed the country to a 90% retention rate by 2030. We're 1/3 of the way towards 2030. Instead of having a retention rate of 90%, we are still as bad as we were 10 years ago, with a retention rate of only 40%. That is a social problem. It's a problem for families. It's a problem for inclusion. It's a problem for young people who are hoping to participate in society, to have a piece of paper that enables them to seek employment.
And do you think that the promotion of learners who are not making sufficient progress contribute to the actual dropout rate that the Equal Education is referring to?
The learner promotion policy is a complex matter. Basically, what the DBE's policy says is that there's no point making learners repeat endlessly and end up being years above the age of their classmates. So the policy, which is consistent with policies across many countries, is that in each phase you can only fail once, which means you'll be 1 year ahead, 1 year older than your classmates if you fail in the first 3 years. You'll be 2 years older than your classmates if you fail again in the second 3 years, and you'll be 3 years older. In fact, 10% of learners who reach grade 12 have failed 3 times or more. So failure and progression is an educational judgment that teachers have to make relative to how learners have succeeded, what their socio-emotional strength is, what are the consequences socially of holding them back. But it does place huge burdens on teachers who increasingly are teaching classes with a wide range of ability, which is more educationally demanding.
All right, please stay on the line, Professor. Thank you so much for staying with us. Mr. Maluleke, you heard a Professor saying that the NDP actually committed to a retention rate of 90% by the year 2030, but it's still a far cry from that. Where is the problem? Where does it lie?
The problem lies in the society, basically. It is that we have not seen the community and the society taking education as fashionable. That's why when they want a tarred road, they will go and ban a school. And when they migrate, they take the children and put them at home for 2 years whilst they are looking for employment. So we need to address those things where we support those particular parents. In particular, employers have got to also come into play here, because if employers are employing people and they migrate them from Gauteng to Northern Cape, and then they take the family, and then you find that the schools that side are not able to admit the children, because we have confronted those particular situations where when a parent migrate or is relocating, the school is not admitting, which is totally unacceptable, because whether it's September or October, the learner has got to be admitted in that school because the learner comes from another school. So there's a record that the learner has been attending the school. In some instances, that because of this fear of being labeled non-performing or dysfunctional school, principals are so strict that they do not want to admit those learners because they don't know their portfolio, whether the portfolios are correct or not, and therefore they fear that they are going to drop their pass rate. So we are so obsessed with statistics and so forth instead of the quality of the learners that we have. So we need to address those things. So unemployment is still high in our country. It's impacting heavily on the parents who, unfortunately, when they don't have money for the transport to transport their learners, and there are no schools closer to where they want their children to be attending, those learners end up dropping out whilst they're looking at. Schools are expensive now, especially those that are charging school fees. I mean, you are told you need to submit 2 salary slips for your partners, and then if you earn at a particular rate, you are not going to be admitted in these so-called private schools. And therefore, the parents who rely on that, most of them, their children drop out, and you're never told that the children from these particular schools, normally they are being told, don't send your child unless you have paid in April, and the child drop out in April and never go back to a public school because you are in a private school. So these are the things that we think needs to be attended to by all of us, including equal education, because we work with them mostly. All
right. Hopolang, do you want to weigh in on that? I mean, equal education is actually of the view that, the overall pass rate is a superficial and a misleading indicator of the entire quality of education. And, you even suggest that for a broader perspective, we need to start using the cohort matric pass rate. How do you think that will be implemented? Weighing into what it just said.
Sure. I firstly just like to say that equal education completely recognizes the hard work that teachers and parents and learners have put into the process of the matric exams, and that it's incredibly significant when learners make it through and pass. So it's not to take away from teachers, it's definitely not to take away from learners. And when we say that it's a superficial indicator, we're not talking to the quality of the certificate or the exam, but more the fact that learners are getting left behind. So those figures don't make any sense. 78% is not a true reflection of the number of learners or the percentage of learners that are actually making it through. So in terms of learner retention or the reasons around learner dropouts, I agree with Mary and Mr. Maluleke around the social factors. They definitely contribute to that. But we also need to start looking at what happens in the earlier grades. So that is the foundation phase, especially around early grade reading. Because we do find that learners struggle when they get to high school. And that's when actually repetition now starts to happen, because learners are struggling, or if repetition isn't happening, then learners start to drop out. And those are the kinds of issues that we need to address as well. What is happening in the classroom, particularly at the earlier phases or the foundation phase. As we say, we often refer to the international literacy test that found that 78% of grade 4 learners could not read for meaning. That's significant, and we need to start addressing that to make sure that our learners are making it through and that they get their matric certificates, that they get their bachelor's passes.
Now, Professor Metcalfe, back to you. I mean, what does the 30% minimum requirement to pass and the throughput of learners say about the entirety of our education system?
I think the entirety of our education system means that we need to look not only at who succeeded and to congratulate them, but we need to look at learner performance all the way through primary school and through grade 8 and 9. So the statistic of 80% or 78% or 76% as it fluctuates from year to year, in my view, is a distraction. We need to remember the figure that Hopolang just quoted. Only 22% of learners in grade 4 in 2016 could read for meaning in any language. 22% is the figure that must stay in our mind about the likelihood of those learners really succeeding in quality of education when increasingly they depend on reading, on textbooks for gaining meaning. Many of them learning in a language they don't fully understand. Again, the NDP commits us that at the end of grade 3, all grade learners should be able to read and write. 6 years ago, that was the pledge. We've only got 12 years to go. With maths, we're in similar problems. People talk about reading because it's the fundamental route to learning in all subjects. But an international study in 2015 showed that only 61% of grade 5 learners in South Africa could actually add and subtract whole numbers. That's no basis on which to build a good quality NSC result.
Unfortunately, Professor, we don't have much time, and time is really not on our side. I wish we could have the whole day to discuss it. But thank you so much for your time, and many thanks to you, Hopolang and Mr. Maluleke, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that was Hopolang Selebalo from Equal Education and Professor Mary Metcalfe on the line, an education expert, and Mr. Mugwena Maluleke, the General-Secretary of SADTU, talking to us about the Matric results that was released last week. This is Morning Live. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have more news in just a moment.